Welcome to Will's Personal Development Podcast, where we bring you data and science-backed answers and advice from billionaires. Hey, what's up? It's Will, and let's just get right to the information. So today we have a very special treat. I want to share with you the 24 lessons I learned from Jeff Bezos and his book, The Everything Store. Now, this is a really well-known book, and Jeff Bezos, if you don't know, he's one of the richest people in the world, and he started Amazon.com. And I've compiled some of my best insights that I've learned from reading this book, as well as watching a few interviews and videos of the man. And it's an incredibly interesting story. Now, first off, this book is very interesting. I mean, you don't get many books like this. There's only so many books by billionaires, and this one really uncovers how Jeff did it, how Jeff thought, what made Amazon tick, and really showed a different side to his success. It really showed why he was successful. And on top of that, it's a story, and it gives you information for the cost of a meal at any fast food joint. You can buy this book, and you literally get all these insights towards one of the most successful people in the world. Now, I found out that this book was not actually written by him, and at first I was a bit skeptical, but then when I really started reading the book, I learned that in reality, the person who wrote it, he had full access to everyone. And so in a certain way, it was better than Jeff writing it, because this man literally spent all this time to interview 500 of like the top executives, including Jeff, and all the people who were very closely associated with Jeff Bezos and his company. So it's really an inside account. And on top of that, it's written by someone who knows how to write. So it's just a great story, and I just really want to share with you some of these tips. I think they will really help you out in your journey. And this is not just about making money or doing well in business, although those will be topics covered. This is also about life advice, and not making choices that you will regret, or sacrificing things unnecessarily to become happier, or in an attempt to become happier. So right now he is pegged by Forbes as the 5th richest person in the world, and it's just an incredible story, because I mean, his rise to success is really, it's pretty fast. Like, no time in history has billionaires really risen to fame that fast. And sure, there's Mark Zuckerberg with Facebook, who one could argue was faster, but nonetheless, this guy was quite fast. So you will learn a lot about his life. I have 24 incredible insights I learned from this man, from these books. And yeah, they are not the top 10 or top 24 insights. That I want to get clear before we get started here. And the reason why I want to clarify that is because a lot of websites, articles, and videos online, they'll say, these are the top 10 tips of success from Steve Jobs or Jeff Bezos. And it's not really the top 10. They are tips on success, but they're not the top 10. They just add that to sound cool. In reality, they just picked their own 10 and just told everyone these are his top 10, which isn't true. So let's just get started. Number 1. Use the regret minimization framework. Now, that might seem fancy or complicated, but it's actually just a fancy way of a very simple framework, or I don't even want to use the word framework because that sounds too fancy. It's just like a simple test you can do to really make sure that you live a full life and you die with no regrets and you really feel fulfilled. Now, Jeff used this back when he was working a full-time job. He had a family, he had a wife to support. And this is a tough situation because he's not young anymore, and he doesn't have the freedom that a single young 20-year-old male can. But he really, really had this strong, crazy idea of starting a store that would sell everything online. And he saw this incoming internet revolution. And he knew that if he didn't get in now, and if he wasn't in the forefront of this, it just wouldn't occur. And so he had a tough life decision to make. And so how did he decide? I think this is such a great test. Anyone should use this. He asked himself, when I'm at my deathbed, what would I regret more? Would I regret not taking a stab at this internet thing? Or would I regret just staying at my job and not taking a stab at it? Or would I regret taking a stab at it? It's basically those two choices. Should I do it or should I not? Which one would I regret more? And for him, he would have regretted more not trying this internet thing, because who really regrets staying at their safe job? No one really regrets that. And when you actually look at the downside risk, if his company didn't work out, he could have returned to his job anyway. So really, it was about doing it or not doing it. There was always that job there for him, and he knew how that job was going to act. And he knew what it was like to work at that job. And so he had to make a very tough decision, and after thinking it through that way, it was pretty darn obvious where to go. So what he decided to do was to start this internet company, and he has actually mentioned this numerous times. Of course, other billionaires and successful people like Steve Jobs have mentioned this. Steve mentioned this in a Stanford commencement speech. I'm just going to read you out a few quotes from that. He says that remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. Number 2, the second thing I learned from Bezos is to niche down first to grow. Now, Bezos, from a very early age, he made it a point that he wanted to create this everything store. He wanted to be a store that sold everything on the internet. However, even he started by niching down. He said, what industry can I dominate first online? And that happened to be books. Why books? Again, it wasn't just some random choice. He actually had logic and thought to it. So that's another lesson. You don't just randomly choose. He actually mapped it out, created a list of 20 different commodities that he could sell, from computers to CDs. And he decided on books because they were already distributed and sold everywhere. People love books. It was something that was scalable, and one book was not different from another book. So he didn't have to go through regional fluctuations because maybe one book is different in a certain region or preferred. And there were only 2 big publishers that handled most of the distribution and manufacturing. So it was really a shoe-in. Like, it was very obvious that, well, not really obvious. It took some foresight. But he decided to go with books, and he ended up starting Amazon.com, only selling books. And once he dominated the book industry, he, of course, expanded and started selling other stuff, including, I think he branched out to CDs next because they were very similar to books, and then so on and so forth. And I just find that very interesting because a lot of successful entrepreneurs, all they'll tell you, like if you listen to these business podcasts or interviews or YouTube videos, they will always tell you niche down first because, again, it makes complete sense. If you niche down, you literally dominate that industry first. And I just find that very interesting. Number 3, the third thing I learned is that investor money is sometimes okay. And what I mean by this is that, sometimes you don't want to take in investor money. And people don't want to because they want to maintain control of their business. But for Bezos, at a certain point in his growth, he realized that it was time. He needed that money to grow. And that was the best thing to do. And he really needed that because if he didn't, he couldn't keep up with the demand. Number 4, I learned to set big goals because you just might reach them and then some. And this is something that a lot of big successful people do, whether it's Elon Musk, Richard Branson, all of them billionaires. They all have these ridiculous goals like, I want to go to Mars, or for Branson, he also wants to travel to space. Bezos, actually, he also was really into that, and then he decided to go into online business instead of space exploration, which I find very interesting. He could have been like Elon Musk right now. Anyhow, if you just look at Jeff Bezos, he literally had these humongous aspirations. And there's a great book on this called The Magic of Thinking Big. And when you really think about it, it makes complete sense, because a lot of people, they're too realistic or practical, so they set small goals. And then when they achieve them, they realize, man, if I had only set bigger goals, I might have achieved those too. And then they kind of miss out. Of course, if you're not dead, there's always room for improvement. So don't just give up if you set the wrong goals. Proceed from then to set on bigger goals. And for Bezos, I mean, his whole company was built off this. He, from a very early age, the early 90s, like 94, he already had like a mathematical plan set out. And he said, like, we'll be growing at this rate, and then by 2000, we'll get this much in sales, 60 million, and then if we did really well by this point, we'll hit $1 billion. And he ended up reaching all of those goals, which I just find incredible, and then some. But again, I think another lesson is that he was very practical with what he did. He wasn't unrealistic. Although he had these crazy goals, he also told everyone that there was a 70% chance that Amazon would completely fail. So he was rational at the same time, while being optimistic in what he wanted to achieve, which I just think is very interesting. It's about being realistic yet optimistic in your aspirations. 5, create a culture of top achievers. So with Bezos, his culture was really important to the success of Amazon. And the biggest thing I could tell you is that he made sure to keep raising the bar with his hiring standards. And the whole point of that was so that every time there was a new round of hires, they just got increasingly better and better and better. And so the standard with which the average employee was just kept increasing. So eventually, he just had superior and more superior employees. Number 6, help customers make better buying decisions. This one is just something that I think really sets Amazon apart. Again, before Amazon was around, Barnes & Nobles and Borders were like these huge giants in the book retail business. And Amazon literally put them out of business. I think Barnes & Noble is still around, but they're struggling. And one thing he did was that he set up online reviews, and you can still see them. They're still used a lot. I still read them a lot on Amazon.com, so that he crowdsourced ideas and honest feedback from people who had purchased the books. Whereas when you went to Barnes & Noble, like, you really had nothing to go off. You couldn't really trust it. But when you go on Amazon, you have 300 or 1,000 online reviews. Guess who's going to do better? Of course, it's going to be Amazon, because they have all these trusted reviews from honest people. And Amazon did not hold back. They made sure not to restrict or taint the reviews by influencing them in any way. Number 7, e-commerce can do powerful things that brick and mortar can't. Now, this lesson really just speaks to the power of the internet. And reading this book really opened my eyes to how impressive the internet is. And it's just about really leveraging that and understanding that. And for Jeff Bezos, he basically significantly increased sales by creating a computer algorithm that recommended products to you based on your past purchases. It was very sophisticated and intelligent, but that's just something that you can't really do in a brick and mortar store. Like, you arguably can, but not as well. Like you can get a store associate to recommend you products and services, but the downside to that is a minimal wage store associate's just not going to put in much effort to do it well, and they're competing against a sophisticated database that can literally find you the perfect product that you're psychologically more willing to buy, which just makes the internet so powerful. And of course he leveraged this to oblivion, and that's why a lot of people, they go on to Amazon or a similar website to buy one thing and they come out buying numerous things. I still think that brick and mortar stores can leverage this in some way, shape, or form, but they'll have to be intelligent with it. I really think technology as a whole can really change things. And there's this great book called The Power of Habit that goes into more detail about this. Walmart is leveraging this with their brick and mortar stores, and there's a story in that book that goes into detail about how Walmart is doing this. But essentially they have like these very sophisticated computer programs that literally detect that you're pregnant before even you know, and it's either before you know or right after you find out. It's just based off your buying habits and what websites you surf and what you buy at a store previously. And by doing this, they are able to figure this out before even your parents find out you're pregnant, which is just ridiculous. Number 8, everyone makes mistakes and that's okay. Now, Jeff has made a ton of mistakes. He's made a lot of failures, and there's a lot of categories and verticals, as you can imagine, in a store that sells everything that he tried to get into that completely flopped. One of them was selling jewelry online. Another was pets.com. He tried acquiring that company and lost $100 million. And what I think he's really good at is just, making those mistakes and learning from them and making very calculated, smart decisions. Number 9, set value principles for your company. Now, Jeff, and you've noticed that many successful companies do this, he made sure to have very definitive value statements for Amazon.com from a very early age. And you can still see them by going to amazon.jobs/principles. And now they're called Amazon's leadership principles. But many of the original values are still there, including ownership, customer obsession, a bias for action, and frugality. And some of these principles, I just looked at them, and they're not only good for his company, but also good for your life. I really do think that frugality and customer obsession are just critical cornerstones to success in your career or any business. And if you have read the book Good to Great, it literally does a scientific analysis of some of the most profitable businesses in history and compared them to very similar companies that ended up failing and really examined why. And one of the big reasons was the successful companies had, from a very early age, a very specific set of core values and goals that were oftentimes beyond just money. Whereas the failures, they didn't even consider creating a list of values. They just ran their business. Number 10, be frugal. Now, Bezos was probably like the most frugal, well, close to one of the most frugal I've ever seen. And this was so there's this one story in the book where Amazon was already making millions. And then Bezos returned from a trip and he just blew up. He just got really angry and just like yelled at everyone. And the reason was simply because someone had bought a TV for a break room without telling him, and he thought it was a needless expenditure. Now, that might be a bit extreme. You might not have to go that far, because I do think that spending money to take care of your employees, which a lot of other billionaires like Sam Walton have mentioned, it pays you back, because how you treat your employees will reflect on how they treat your customers. And of course, if you treat your customers well, you make more money. But having said that, there is a truth to frugality there. If you read the book, The Millionaire Next Door, which is a profile and analysis of thousands of millionaires, they found in that book that most of the millionaires are very, very frugal. Like the average car for a millionaire, the most commonly bought car is a pickup truck. They're very frugal and they save their money, and it makes sense. And it turns out that the 1% of flashy millionaires out there are the ones who really give millionaires a bad name and make the general public think that millionaires spend frivolously on all these unnecessary expenses. So there is a grain of truth to frugality, and a lot of companies don't do this. They just don't. They spend wildly, and they just spend on needless things. Oh, let's buy a $10,000 car when we don't need to. Oh, let's hire this person when we don't need that person. And it just gets out of control. And Warren Buffett, again, he talks a lot about this and how crazy it is. But let's move on to number 11. Think of crazy possibilities and try it out. Jeff was very good at really trying out crazy ideas and coming up with crazy ideas. And change is something that you really need to succeed. And it reminds me of Jack Ma of Alibaba. Alibaba is a similar, though somewhat different, internet e-commerce business in China. And it's just as big as Amazon. And their founder is called Jack Ma, and his nickname's Crazy Jack. And Jack had a lot of crazy ideas of himself. So both of these people, they just had these ridiculous ideas. Oh, what if we do it this way? Oh, what if we did it that way? And he just had all these like crazy ideas on how to run a business and how they can make their websites better. Jeff had an idea where he literally, he said, why is the bestseller list only 100 people? Why don't we make it infinite? We'll just keep going down and down and down, and we'll display the whole thing on the website. And it turned out to be true. The reason why it was only 100 people on the bestsellers list before was because newspapers, they ran out of, it was costly to pay for the ink for the newspapers. But when you're on the internet, you don't have to pay for that cost. So he literally flipped an assumption on its head because it wasn't the same thing anymore because they were online. Next thing, number 12, always put the customers first. Now, you might think that this is obvious, but when you really think about it, most people who run businesses, they really don't do this. They think that they do, but when they talk to customers, guess what happens? These customers continue to do the same thing and say that, oh, this business, they didn't treat me well. So it's not about whether you believe that you treated your customers well. It's if the majority of them really express their opinions and say that you did without any influence or pressure from you. And Jeff is someone who literally, he spends his every moment of his day seeking to learn how he can delight his customers even more and more and more. And this was something that a lot of his board, a lot of his executives, a lot of his employees, a lot of the general public, investors, news stations, shareholders, a lot of people argued with him about. They kept telling him, you can't do this. Amazon is not making any money by doing this. You're ruining the company. But he kept doing it because he knew that the customer would like it. And in the long term, it would pay off and it would lead to incredible brand loyalty, brand trust, and reputation. And a great example would be when he drove down the price of shipping to a ridiculous amount. So he knew that customers wanted cheaper products, higher quality, and they didn't like paying for shipping. So he added this thing called free shipping with any order value of $100 or more, which is now very common online. And then he just kept driving down the price. So then it became free shipping with any order value of $50 or more, and then $30, and now it's $25, and he keeps driving this down and lowering the price and lowering the price. And for years and years, Amazon was losing money. They weren't making any money, and everyone was telling him, "You're idiots. You never make money. This company's going red." But it was a very weird situation because although they were losing money, they weren't making money. Amazon.com, in terms of visitors, traffic, sales, people buying the stuff, it kept increasing because the customers were liking it. So it was very eerie. And of course, if you do that too much, you can run out. Like if I could, I would literally buy a bunch of stuff from Amazon or a manufacturer and ship it out to everyone watching this podcast for free or pennies on the dollar. But you can only do that for so long before you run out of money. And so he did a strategic gamble, or not, it wasn't even a gamble. He just did something smart and it paid off. That's it for this episode, but there's so much more I want to cover. I only got to 12 tips, and there's 12 more that I didn't even mention. So stay tuned, hit the subscribe button, and in the next episode of this show, I'll share with you the other 12 tips I learned from Jeff Bezos. Thanks so much. See you next time. Thank you for listening to Will's Personal Development Podcast. You can find more at willyoulaugh.com.